At about 4:30 a.m. on March 19th, 1996, a panic alarm alerted the guards to a disturbance at Jack White's Inn near British Bay in County Wicklow. 10 minutes later, Gardaí arrived to find Tom Nevin shot dead in the kitchen of his pub in what appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. The nearby safe had been ransacked, its trays scattered on the floor and the money gone. His wife, Catherine Nevin, was found shaking, sat behind the hall door of the pub, her hands tied by a dressing gown cord. She would claim that a hooded man had threatened her in bed with a knife, demanding to know where her jewellery was, tied her up, ransacked the place, and had murdered her husband. One part of her story would inevitably prove to be true. Tom Nevin was murdered that night, but Catherine Nevin was far from the innocent bystander she claimed to be. I'm Fionn Sheehan, and today on the Indo Daily, in the first of a two-part special, I'm joined by former RTE Legal Affairs editor and presenter of Drive Time in Morning Ireland on RTE Radio 1, Mary Wilson, to discuss the story behind one of Ireland's most notorious criminals, the Black Widow. Mary Wilson, very welcome to the Indo Daily. Thanks very much for joining us.
First time for me.
First time. And you're sitting in that chair now rather than this one.
And I'm being interviewed by Fionn Sheehan instead of interviewing.
Role reversal.
It's all change.
People will be very familiar with your career as a broadcaster with Drive Time and Morning Ireland. But tell us what you were up to back in the mid-90s, because it'll become very relevant as we talk about this story. So 1996, 30 years ago, where were you? What were you doing?
30 years ago. Jesus, it's a long time ago. 30 years ago, I was, in a working career, I was RT's newly appointed legal affairs correspondent. And in the first 3 or 4 months of that year, I was running between two major trials. On the one hand, you had, at the time, two of the most high-profile cases we'd had in the criminal and the civil courts. On the one hand, you had Senator Des Hannafin challenging the recently concluded divorce referendum. He was challenging the result. And on the other hand, you had a criminal trial running of a young chap called Brendan O'Donnell, who had been accused of murdering a young mother, Imelda Riney, her son Liam, and a priest called Father Joe Welsh in horrific circumstances. So when you ask where was my life at that stage, my working life, my working life was completely dominated by those two cases that were running side by side. So when events in March, on March 19th, when I woke up to listen to RTE Radio 1, and I heard that a publican had been murdered, or at least shot dead, we didn't know the circumstances, down near British Bay, to be honest, I wasn't paying that much attention.
Yeah, little did you realise what would come. So talk to me about, before we get into events, talk to me about the people. Tom Nevin, who was he?
Tom Nevin, many people called him the gentle giant. Now, the interesting thing about court cases is that the dead person is often almost extraneous to the entire proceedings because they're gone. And you're concentrating on the trial of the accused. But what I learned about Tom Nevin, I never knew him. None of us ever knew Tom Nevin. Tom Nevin was known as a gentle giant. He was from a place called Tina in County Galway. He was one of, I think, 9 children. Grew up in not poverty, but times were tough. Most of them left home to go and seek work elsewhere. Tom came to Dublin to work with a relative of his, an uncle of his in the bar trade, served his time. But there was an ambition to Tom Nevin. He didn't just want to work as a barman. He wanted to own a bar. And gradually over time, he built up his business acumen and he started managing a bar in Dolphin's Barn. And then he went off to England and I think did some bar managing over there. Married and came back to Dublin, and sometime in the mid-70s, in a place called the Castle, which was up near Parnell Square, he met the woman who would do for him in the end. Yeah,
so on a pre-1996 level, tell me about Catherine Nevin.
So what did we learn about Catherine? Catherine was an industrious young woman from a little place called Nerney. And people might know Nerney now. If you're turning off for the Kildare Village shopping centre, you'll see that sign at, is it exit 16 or exit 13 for Nerney. She grew up in that little village. Again, she grew up on a small farm. She was one of 3 children. She went to the local school. By all accounts, she was a good student. She was good with numbers. And somewhere in Catherine, there was also ambition. She wanted to get out of Nerney. And she moved to Dublin and she got a job as a receptionist in this pub hotel, the Castle Hotel on Parnell Street or Parnell Square. And worked her way up there. And very soon, I think, had the confidence of the owners, and she was doing the books. And she was... Catherine Nevin was always a great schmoozer, I think. And she seemed to get to know the customers. She got on well with the customers. And at that time in the 70s, you had the Sinn Féin offices very close by. She got to know, or she claimed, and I make this point very strongly, Catherine claimed to know a lot of movers and shakers who supposedly had links to the IRA and links to Sinn Féin. She would have said she counted Cathal Goulding among her friends. Whether she did or whether she didn't, we never fully knew the truth of that. But she liked to name drop, and she liked to name drop IRA people and Sinn Féin people.
And that was part of her essence, was that she saw herself as a kind of a networker, maybe even what we would call a social climber.
Yeah, the social climbing, I suppose, we didn't see in its full glare until much later. But definitely, yeah, she was a woman who liked to see and be seen. And you saw that. And it's important to say, she was a great businesswoman.
That's the thing about them both. So they're both from kind of small rural farming backgrounds.
Very typical of lots of people of that time who grew up in the 50s.
Good work ethic.
Good work ethic.
Used to hard work, enterprising. So they came together, and there was almost, there was a lot of comparisons in terms of their background and their own outlook on life.
They had a lot in common.
Yeah.
And they moved on to a place called Barry House. So after they married in Rome.
Yeah, so
Tom had got an annulment. Tom had been married, as I say, briefly. And that ex-wife, in fact, did give evidence at one stage during the trial. And she spoke about Tom in pretty glowing terms as a decent, hard-working, gentle giant, as I say, of a man. Himself and Catherine, we got married in Rome, as so many couples did at that time. Tom having had a state and church annulment to his first marriage. And they moved to manage the Barry House in Finglas, which apparently was a thriving pub in Finglas at that time, which again attracted a lot of fellas who might or might not have been on the fringes of or involved in the IRA. On Public may or may not have been sold on the premises, and Catherine may or may not have been sympathetic to the cause at the time. And
those kind of Republican fringe relationships proved helpful in terms of kind of cleaning up the act of the place as well, it would appear.
That certainly was said. Yeah. And that's why I couch everything I'm saying here, because, you have to try and separate fact from fiction and what may or may not have been the case. But yes, there was never any evidence to suggest that Tom was paying any sort of cash to anybody to make sure that security was kept straight and in line in the area. But certainly, maybe some of the security elements who worked in the pub had links to the IRA at the time.
Yeah, I suppose sometimes the mere whiff of cordite alone is enough to send a signal out to people. So, as you say, they're running this pub, but they're leasing it. They don't own it. The ambition, though, is to own their own place.
They're doing well, but the ambition is there. So you have Tom. I think a man good at collecting the cash, minding the money, and you have Catherine, who's probably thinking to herself, I can do better than this. And then a pub came on the market in sometime around 1986, I think, Jack White's Inn. Not a particularly big pub. Jack White's Inn, people will know it if they're driving down to the old road, driving down to Wicklow or Wexford. On the corner, good location, close enough to British Bay, which, as we know, has always been the favourite holiday spot of a lot of the D4 people who always like to have a bolt hole in British Bay. Catherine saw the potential of this, and she saw something else was happening at that time as well. There was a new golf club called the European, which had opened in the area. and it didn't have a clubhouse. Catherine thought, we can be the 19th hole, we can be the clubhouse. And so they bought Jack White's. They paid about 270,000, not an inconsiderable sum at the time. And they were indebted. They were heavily enough indebted. But she developed the business very quickly. They developed bed and breakfast. They developed the food side of the business. And very quickly they became the dropping in spot for people who were holidaying in Britis, for golfers who were golfing in the European. And they also became a Garda house.
Okay.
And they became the go-to spot. Gardaí may be coming up and down to the courts in Dublin, stop in for a coffee, stop in after work for a drink. So they became well known. And Catherine was generally found, it seemed, on the high stool outside the bar, schmoozing, as I say, well able to chat and look after people. And she was out there more than she was behind the bar. Tom, the quieter, hard-working man, was behind the bar, pulling the pints, looking after the money. And the relationship seemed to work on that level. And for a long time, there was no talk of any cracks in that relationship.
Yeah, and she was very much the front of house, the face of it.
She was the face of the business.
While he was kind of the logistics man behind the scene.
He was the man moving in the barrels and pulling the pints.
Yeah. So, as you say, it seemed to be a harmonious enough relationship, but gradually was it apparent to people that there were cracks appearing?
It started to become apparent that she wasn't nice to Tom. And there are two trains of thought. On the one hand, she would have put out the view that Tom was a very heavy drinker, that he was violent, that he had beaten her on one occasion, certainly, that she suggested had happened. On the other hand, you had a lot of evidence from bar staff who worked in the place and slept overnight in the place quite a lot, that Tom... he might have a glass of Guinness while he was counting the money at night. But they wouldn't have suggested that this was a man knocking back a half bottle of whiskey every evening. And you kind of wonder as well, can you run a business at that level and be what... Well, she would have called him, I think, a functioning alcoholic. And maybe you can for a time. So again... what the real truth of that is, we know not.
Yeah, the presentation out front was one thing.
Yeah.
What was going on behind the scenes?
She wasn't nice to Tom, and there was very clear evidence of that. She put him down. And staff at Jack White's would start talking about the schmoozing of the customers may have led to relationships. Now, there's only one relationship she never acknowledged ever having an extramarital affair. Certainly, certain characters were asked if they'd had a relationship with Catherine Nevin, and some of them denied that. But one man said he had had a relationship with her for a couple of years, and that was a man called Willie McLean. She denied it, but he said, yes, they did have a relationship. And the evidence of some of the bar staff was that she conducted those relationships in plain sight of Tom Nevin. And in fact, even in her bedroom, in plain sight of Tom Nevin. At that stage, the two of them had apparently resorted to different ends of the premises and had separate rooms.
Yeah, and she, in her role as kind of the front of house person, she was a very glamorous, good-looking lady.
Yeah, she was, I suppose, what you would expect from that front of house person in a pub that was striving forward and going places. She dressed well, she looked well. She had a background as well, I didn't mention it to you earlier, but she had a background in grooming. And at one stage, during her time in the castle, when she married Tom, she tried to develop a business where she would help young women to present their best selves, to dress well, to do their hair well, to put on their makeup properly. And she tried to develop that into a modelling agency of some sort. Didn't really work. But she did for a time go to schools to, I suppose, teach a little bit of deportment to young country girls as to how they were going to present themselves to the world.
Yeah, and again, she came from that background and basically was of view, listen, life is different above in the big city and you need to present
I've cracked it. I can teach you how to crack it. You can do it too.
So, look, whatever about the personal life, the business life is going well. Thriving pub on a busy road, increasingly busy. Yeah. Dublin is expanding out into Wicklow, Britis Bay. The economy is on the rise as well. As you say, there's seasonal factors with the summer trade, the golf club, and so on. Things are going well. we then get to that St. Patrick's weekend of 30 years ago. And as everybody knows, Patrick's weekend is a busy flying publican weekend. The great start of the tourist season. You get a lot of people coming home and coming in from abroad. So they would have been busy in Jack White's that weekend.
Yeah, that weekend. Yeah, the St. Patrick's weekend, St. Patrick's Day fell on the Sunday that weekend. The place was thriving. They had a great staff. Everybody was working well. They were doing food, they were doing drink. Crowds are in over the weekend. But a couple of things happened that weekend. There was a disco on in Arklow, and all the staff were going to the disco on the Monday night, which was the 19th, the 18th. But Catherine said to them, "No, you can't come back that night. You can't sleep over that night." She was adamant about this. They thought it was weird because a couple of the trusted staff were key holders, and when they'd all go out together to a disco or to a pub someplace after hours, they'd come back, and the trusted key holders, there was one or two of them, could let everybody in and they could sleep on the premises, and they'd be there the next day to resume work and so on. That night, said, "You're all going home. Nobody's staying."
So unusual behaviour.
Very unusual behaviour.
So we've a busy weekend. We've got good takings. Probably, people can judge this themselves. I'd say Paddy weekend is probably the first good weekend that people have seen since Christmas. If you're running a pub, good solid one, and a bank holiday weekend, sure, all the better. Tell me then about events as they unfolded on that night of March the 19th.
So the pub closed around closing time. It wasn't a late house on that night anyway. Catherine said that she went off to bed about 12:30, took a sleeping tablet, went to sleep. She'd done the takings of the day that day, went off to bed, as I say, and presumably taking a sleeping tablet would fall into a deep sleep. Tom did what he would always do, and he went into the kitchen to count the takings. Now, he would normally have gone to the bank maybe on the Friday or to put in the takings on that day, or gone to the overnight safe. But for whatever reason, he didn't on that weekend. So there would have been some 15 or 16,000 in total on the premises after the weekend. Tom was in the kitchen, and it would appear that he was shot at close range by a shotgun, which basically incapacitated and killed him within seconds. Sometime between 12:30, 1 o'clock. And when the alarm was raised by Catherine, sometime after 4:15, 4:20 in the morning.
So even nowadays, I think a murder like that would be shocking.
Yeah.
Hard-working publican on his preferences, the subject of an armed raid by raiders who were so ruthless that they murdered the men.
Yeah.
I presume back in 1996 that would certainly have made national headlines and come to enormous attention.
And it did. It was on the early morning news bulletins. And the other factor in the case at that stage was that his wife, Catherine, had been roused from sleep, she said, by feeling something in her back, which she's suggesting it was a knife, and a masked raider saying to her, "Where's the effing jewellery?" Ransacking her bedroom, tying her up, stuffing a pair of silk panties into her mouth, tying her with a pair of stockings around the mouth, binding her hands with a purple bathrobe tie, and tying her to the bed. Meanwhile, she said she heard a sound like the clatter of pans downstairs, but she's tied up, petrified, as you would be, and she can do nothing. The man, she didn't say he was armed. I think she said he had something, could have been a knife, could have been a gun. And sometime later, around 4 o'clock, she managed to get her feet loose, made her way downstairs, but fell on the ground, managed to press the alarm button, which of course then went in the alarm company and the guards were alerted. But she was still gagged, still her hands were still bound, but she had managed to get her feet free, and she was at the bottom of the stairs by the door. The outside door was ajar. So the guards arrived very quickly, within 15 minutes, and they find Catherine in this awful state inside the door. They had to cut the bind around her mouth, and she's screaming, "Where's Tom? Where's Tom?" And the Gardaí bring her into the living room, put her sitting down, try to calm her down. No suspicion at this stage of anything that will unfold later. And of course then they find Tom, and all hell breaks loose. Obviously forensics are called in, state pathologist is called in, and the Garda operation kicks into gear.
Yeah, which we would know now at the announcement of a murder investigation.
And Catherine, in the immediate aftermath, tells the story as I've related it to you, that she'd gone to bed about 12:30, she'd taken the tablet, then she wakes up to this man screaming, "Where's the jewellery?" And she gets free, comes downstairs, and this is what she sees.
So there's a opportunistic robbery, there's a ransacking, and that leads to a murder and the tying up of the second witness.
And the car, Tom's car, an Opel Omega, is missing.
Okay. Is it fair to say that pretty early on the guards started to get suspicions?
Yes, it
Didn't add
is.
up.
Yeah, it is. And of course, this all came out much, much later. These events are happening in 1996. The trial of Catherine Nevin didn't happen until 2000. So there's a 4-year space here. They got suspicious very early on. There was an interesting point here, that morning, an Assistant Commissioner, Joe McHugh, was at the scene very early. It is unusual, I'm told, for an Assistant Commissioner to be present at a murder scene. Certainly a murder scene like this very early on. This wasn't a gangland. It was clear from the start. We're not talking gangland here, but you are talking horrific murder and robbery. But he was on the scene very early on. But there were certain unexplained events very quickly. The jewellery was strewn all over the place.
Not taken.
Not taken. Tom, the money from the takings was gone. But Tom's wallet was out of his pocket apparently, and he had £400 or £500 at the time in the wallet. The wallet was still there. There was no sign of a break-in. There was, other than the door seemed to be on the latch as opposed to broken into. And there was another factor that you have to take everything together ultimately. No one factor, I suppose, set the guards on alert. Catherine said, perhaps not then, but later, that she got the smell of incense or cordite. But she was never in the kitchen where Tom
So that would
was
appear
shot.
to be the smell from the gunshot.
The gun discharging. Yeah. But how did she get that smell when she wasn't next to or near where the gun was discharged? She was upstairs at the time of the robbery,
Big
and
building.
the most she made it to was downstairs outside the door. So take all those factors. The guards would say to you, the Gardaí would say, initially they didn't have suspicions. That it was as events unfolded that suspicions unrolled. Tom Nevin's family all arrived from Tina in the immediate days afterwards. Everyone is distraught. Catherine is absolutely distraught. And of course there is this scene at the funeral, which is fine. She's a grieving widow who's lost her husband, and she's carrying a single red rose behind Tom's coffin as he's buried in a local graveyard in County Wicklow. In the immediate aftermath of the funeral, she said she wanted that Tom's wish would have been to have been buried back home in Tina in Galway, back in his own place. But she very rapidly said, no, Tom is staying here. He's going to be buried in Wicklow near the premises, and that is in fact what happened. But she was never friendly with Tom's family, and certainly at that stage there was no hand of friendship towards the family in the mourning days after Tom's death and funeral.
Her appearance at the funeral, as you say, again, immaculately dressed, holding this red rose. Emotionally, how did she appear at that funeral? Because that became the subject of some commentary later.
It did, but you see, it's all with the benefit of hindsight later. At the time, a grieving widow standing, whether it's stoic or doubled over in grief, she's a grieving widow burying her husband who's been killed in the most appalling circumstances. The community rallied around, everybody came out. what people knew. But in the way of the Irish, as you know, Fionn, nobody speaks ill of the dead or the wife of the dead. Yeah. So the stories about Catherine and about the dysfunctional relationship and about what was happening in and around the time of Tom's death, that only came to light in the weeks and months that followed as the Garda investigation progressed.